For most of my life, I wore hate like armor. It was the kind of hate that felt justified because it had roots. Roots that were planted by what I saw on the news, what I heard at dinner tables, and what I picked up from people I trusted. I never questioned it. Muslims were dangerous. They were different. And I believed that their beliefs were a threat to everything I thought was good and right. I didn't need proof. The world around me offered enough reinforcement that I never even looked past the label. And so for 30 years, I carried that prejudice in my heart, confident that I knew the truth, until the moment my life literally depended on the very person I had spent so long hating. It wasn't a dramatic movie scene. It didn't happen in the middle of some war zone. It happened in a place that should have felt safe, the side of a highway. I had been driving late at night, tired and distracted. When I lost control of the car, it flipped. Metal twisted, glass shattered, and I was pinged, bleeding, and unable to move. For what felt like forever, I sat in the wreckage, alone, terrified, and certain I was going to die. Then I heard footsteps, not the rush of sirens, not the hum of an ambulance, steady saying, "I'm here, you're not alone." He wore a kufi and spoke with an accent. I noticed it immediately. Everything I had learned to fear was right there in that moment, and yet he didn't hesitate. While I bled and panicked, he crawled into that wreckage, unbothered by the risk, and began comforting me. He talked to me like I mattered, like my life was worth something. Even though he didn't know my name, he put pressure on my wounds, called for help, and stayed until the paramedics arrived. He prayed quietly while I slipped in and out of consciousness, not for show. Not to convert me, just because it was all he had to offer. I later found out that his name was Tariq. He was a father, a school teacher, and a man who lived less than 2 miles from me. I had probably passed him at the grocery store or stood behind him at a red light and never once thought of him as anything more than a stranger. Worse than that, I had likely judged him, silently. And yet, when I needed help, when it would have been easy to walk away to say, "Not my problem," he chose to save me. Not because he knew me, but because he was taught to honor life, taught to serve others, taught to love for the sake of God, even those who might hate him. Lying in that hospital bed, I had time to think about my life, about the lie I had lived, and about the man who destroyed years of hate in a single night. The world had painted Muslims as enemies, but it was a Muslim who reached into the broken parts of my world and pulled me out. That realization shattered something inside me, something that needed to break. The hardest part wasn't admitting that I had been wrong. It was realizing how many people I had wronged in my mind, how many lives I had judged from a distance, never bothering to understand. And all it took to wake me up was one act of compassion. One man's willingness to be human when I had spent years denying him his humanity. There is a deep kind of silence that follows the moment your belief system collapses, not because someone argued you into a corner, but because someone loved you when they didn't have to. That kind of love doesn't scream or lecture. It shows up quietly when it's least expected and leaves a permanent mark. When I looked into the eyes of the man who saved me, I wasn't just seeing a stranger. I was seeing a mirror held up to every wrong idea I had ever believed. And the worst part wasn't just being wrong. It was realizing how much hate had stolen from me. For 30 years, I built walls. I surrounded myself with people who believed what I believed. We told each other stories that kept the fear alive. Stories about Muslims being dangerous, violent, backward, thinking. We used headlines, half-truths, and one-sided images to justify our views. We laughed at jokes that dehumanized others. We avoided neighborhoods. We raised eyebrows when we heard certain names, and we thought we were being patriotic, or careful, or just honest. But underneath all of that was fear. A fear so strong it had blinded me to the beauty of human connection. And then came Tariq. He didn't call me out. He didn't rub my prejudice in my face. He didn't even know what I used to believe. All he did was act with compassion. Compassion. That was it. But that act of compassion screamed louder than any sermon or speech. It made me question everything. Why would a man I had considered the enemy treat? I had thought hate made me strong, but in truth it had made me small. It kept my world narrow. It made me hard. And when Tariq knelt beside me, bloodied and shaking, he didn't just rescue me from the wreckage of that car. He rescued me from the wreckage of my own ignorance. And that is a kind of salvation no one prepares you for. Sometimes the most dangerous thing about love is that it forces you to see, to really see, not just others, but yourself. To confront the ugliness you've carried. To realize that what you called a truth was just inherited fear, and that the person you looked down on had more courage in one moment than you've had in a lifetime. That's what happened to me. I was proven wrong, not by argument, but by grace. And that grace haunts me in the best way. It follows me in conversations. It challenges me in silent moments. It whispers to me every time I hear someone speak the same way I once did. And it gives me the strength to speak up, not with anger, but with humility. Because when someone saves your life, you don't just owe them gratitude, you owe them truth. And the truth is this: I lived 30 years hating Muslims, but in the end, it was a Muslim who showed me what it means to be human. For most of my life, I didn't see Muslims as human the way I saw myself or my neighbors. That's a harsh truth to admit, but it's the truth to admit. But it's the truth. I reduced them to labels: terrorist, radical, foreign, different. And those labels made it easy to justify my fear, my anger, and even my silence when others spoke with cruelty. I didn't have to see mothers, fathers, children, dreamers, or people just trying to live a decent life. I only saw a group I had been told not to trust. The humanity was there all along. I just refused to see it. That refusal wasn't passive. It was deliberate. I turned the other way when Muslims were shown suffering. I rolled my eyes when they were portrayed as victims. I justified suspicion, supported policies that harmed them, and never once thought of how it felt to live under the weight of such judgment. I believed I was protecting my country, protecting my values. But what I was really doing was protecting my ignorance. I kept the world small so I wouldn't have to feel the discomfort of understanding those I'd been taught to fear. And then came a moment that exposed how wrong I was. Came a moment that exposed how wrong I was. They didn't have to. He could have walked away. He could have looked at me the way I once looked at people like him, as a problem, not a person. But instead, he ran toward my wreckage. He knelt in glass, steadied his hands on my wounds, and spoke to me like I mattered. That moment shattered something inside me. For the first time, I was forced to see, not the Muslim man, but a man. Not a threat, but a protector. Not the enemy, but someone who saw me as a fellow human being. After that, I couldn't go back. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I began to notice the humanity I had always filtered out. The kindness in a shop owner's smile. The patience of a hijabi mother walking her children to school. The warmth of neighbors I never spoke to. I started hearing their stories, not just reading headlines. I learned about their faith. Not what the media said about it, but what they lived every day. Peace, mercy, charity, prayer, community. And most of all, I saw people who were trying to love, work, raise children, and be decent, just like me. The hardest part wasn't discovering their humanity. It was facing the fact that it had always been there, and I had been too blind to acknowledge it. I realized that my hate had made me a prisoner. I wasn't protecting anything. I was avoiding growth. I had lived in fear because I never had the courage to learn. But now I had no excuse. No, not after someone I had feared became the one who saved my life. That single act of compassion forced my eyes open. And when they opened, I saw a world filled with the kind of beauty I'd been missing all along. That beauty wasn't just in their faces or their culture. It was in their strength, their dignity, and their ability to forgive even people like me. That was the humanity I refused to see until one man, one moment, and one miracle opened my eyes forever. Hate is heavy, but it often feels invisible to the one who carries it. You don't realize how it shaped your vision, your words, your judgments, until something cracks it wide open. That's what happened to me. I had spent 30 years building up walls of suspicion, misunderstanding, and fear. I had imagined that Muslims were so different from me, so other, that there could be no shared ground between us. But all it took to destroy that mindset, decades in the making, was one act of human compassion. There's something mysterious and powerful about how a single moment can rewrite an entire story. Tariq didn't know me. He didn't know that I had once laughed at racist jokes or nodded silently in agreement when others mocked his faith. He didn't know that if I had seen him on the street a week earlier, I would have crossed the road or looked away. All he knew was that someone needed help. And he gave that help without hesitation. That one act, selfless, instinctive, and pure, disarmed every prejudice I thought was too deeply rooted to ever be moved. I think about that often. How easy it would have been for him to ignore me, to assume I wasn't his responsibility. But he chose to step in, and that choice didn't just save my life. It shattered my inner narrative. It replaced fear with gratitude, suspicion with clarity, and most of all, hatred with humility. It showed me that love doesn't need a long introduction. It doesn't ask what you believe before it decides to help. It simply responds to suffering with presence. That's what he gave me in that moment. Presence. A hand when I was broken, a voice when I was scared, a prayer when I was too weak to hope. What struck me the most was that he never asked for recognition. He wasn't trying to change my beliefs or win an argument. He wasn't acting to be admired. He just was a human being doing what humans are supposed to do. Care for one another. And that sincerity cut through years of built-up lies like a beam of light in a long dark tunnel. It showed me that hate can only survive where love is absent. But when love steps into the room, genuine, unfiltered love, it leaves no space for ignorance to breathe. I used to think it would take a grand debate or a perfect speech to change a mind like mine. But now I know better. Sometimes it takes just one act. One moment of unexpected mercy to tip the scale. One hand reaching out to a person drowning in their own misconceptions. That's all it took to begin healing my soul. And if one man could do that for me, a complete stranger, what could happen if more people lived that way? If more of us led with love, even toward those who didn't deserve it? If more of us responded to hate, not with bitterness, but with boundless humanity? The power of one act is not small. It is revolutionary, and it reminds us that no matter how far gone someone seems, there is always a door back to truth. Change doesn't begin with reading a book or hearing a good argument. True transformation starts when you're forced to confront yourself, your fears, your prejudices, your deep-seated beliefs that you've never truly examined. That confrontation doesn't feel like enlightenment at first. It feels like shame. That's where the real work began. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't happen overnight. I had to sit with the discomfort of my past words, my silence in rooms where hate was spoken freely, and my unwillingness to question what I'd been taught. I had to reach out to people I once avoided. I had to listen, not to reply, but to learn. And in that quiet listening, I found healing, not just for my understanding of Muslims, but for my soul, which had grown calloused under the weight of bitterness and fear. Transformation is messy. It breaks you before it builds you. It brings tears, regret, and sometimes isolation. But it also brings something else, freedom. I didn't know how heavy hate was until I put it down. I didn't know how limited my world was until I stepped outside the lines I had drawn around. And none of that would have been possible if I hadn't first looked in the mirror and told the truth. Yes, I lived 30 years hating Muslims, but I'm not that man anymore. Not because someone forced me to change, but because someone loved me enough to show me the truth, even when I didn't deserve it. The lie I believed for 30 years was that Muslims were my enemy, that they were violent, intolerant, and dangerous. I was taught that they wanted to destroy everything I stood for, that they were not to be trusted, not to be befriended, and certainly not to be understood. That lie echoed through news channels, conversations, books, and even places I called sacred. It was a lie so loud I couldn't hear anything else. But then, through one moment of unshakable compassion, love stepped in, and I finally realized something. Love is louder than lies, but only when we choose to listen. When Tariq saved me, he didn't argue theology. He didn't explain the pillars of Islam. He didn't quote the Quran or try to correct my past. He simply showed up in love. And in that act, every stereotype I clung to crumbled beneath the weight of truth. Because you can't fake that kind of love. You can't stage it, rehearse it, or manipulate it. Real love, sacrificial, instinctive, selfless, carries an authority that no headline, no rumor, and no political opinion can overpower. I started to understand that all my hatred had been rooted in fear, and all my fear had been rooted in ignorance. I never knew real Muslims. I only knew the version of them I had been sold, a version shaped by politics and pain, not by people. But the love I experienced from that man silenced the noise. It didn't erase my past, but it rewrote my future. I realized something powerful in the aftermath. We underestimate how love speaks. We assume it's soft or sentimental, but love is a force. It doesn't just comfort. It confronts. It challenges hate without violence. It exposes lies without argument. And when it's lived out with authenticity, it can't be ignored. Love speaks in a universal language, the kind that doesn't need translation. I didn't know anything about Islamic teachings at the time, but I saw one thing clearly. This man had something inside him that guided him to save someone like me. And that something had to be divine. That realization led me to explore not just Muslims but Islam. I wanted to know what kind of belief system creates people like him, people who forgive instead of fight, help instead of hate. What I found wasn't a religion of violence, but one rooted in peace, patience, prayer, and mercy. A faith that commanded its followers to serve, to honor, and to love, even those who didn't love them back. I couldn't ignore that, and more importantly, I didn't want to. Love changed me. Not logic, not shame, not force. Love. It didn't knock on my door, it broke it down. And in doing so, it handed me back my humanity, the part of me I had lost in the noise of lies. So now, I use my voice to say what I once would have denied. The people I feared were never my enemy. The real enemy was the lie that told me to hate them. And it was love, brave, unshakable love, that finally set me free.